Once upon a time, in a small village in the eastern part of Nigeria, there lived a young girl named Ifeoma. Ifeoma was a beauty of the village. Everyone who saw her would marvel at her gentle face, her sparkling eyes, and her quiet, clever mind. She lived with her aunt because her parents had died when she was very young. Though her aunt gave her food and a place to sleep, the home was not a loving home. There were rules, sharp words, and strict eyes. But Ifeoma had a heart full of dreams, and she hoped that one day, she would find love, a true love that would not only see her beauty but also her soul. Now, in that same village, there was a young man named Chike. Chike was not rich. He had no grand house, no gold, no silver, and no fine clothes. But Chike had courage, a kind heart, and a smile that could melt the hardest of hearts. The village people liked him, though they often laughed at him for being poor. One fateful day, as the sun was setting over the hills, Ifeoma and Chike met at the edge of the river. It was not planned, but destiny had already started its work. They spoke softly, shyly at first, then laughed together as if they had known each other all their lives. From that day on, they could not stay apart. Ifeoma would find ways to escape from her aunt's house. Sometimes, she would sleep quietly before dawn, her feet bare on the cold earth, to meet Chike under the big Iroko tree, the tree that everyone said was blessed. There, they would sit, talk, and dream about a future together. The birds would sing, the wind would whisper through the leaves, and for those moments, the whole world belonged to them. Everyone in the village began to notice. Friends whispered in the market, mothers shook their heads, and even the village children giggled as Ifeoma and Chike passed by holding hands. But love, as they say, does not care for gossip. And their love was deep, strong, and full of promises. They swore to each other that they would always be together, that no power on earth would separate them. But, as with many great loves, trouble came quietly, like a thief in the night. One morning, Ifeoma felt a strange fear in her heart. She had discovered she was pregnant. Her first thought was Chike. Her second thought was fear of what the village would say, fear of what her aunt would do, fear of what would happen to her life. After days of trembling and sleepless nights, Ifeoma went to Chike. Her legs shook, her voice quivered, and tears ran down her cheeks. "Chike, I am pregnant," she whispered, barely able to speak. Chike's eyes widened. His face turned pale. "Pregnant? But how? What will we do?" His voice cracked. His hands trembled. This was his first time facing such a thing. Though he loved her with all his heart, fear, raw and paralyzing, took hold. Without another word, he ran. He ran out of the village, leaving behind his love, his promises, and the frightened girl who loved him. Ifeoma was left alone, with no one to turn to. Days turned to weeks, and she was chased from her aunt's house. She wandered, fearful and weary, carrying the life growing inside her. And when the time came, when she could bear the burden no longer, she gave birth in secret. But fear still ruled her heart. She wrapped the newborn baby in a blue blanket, one that had belonged to her late mother, and, with trembling hands, placed the child in the forest. "The forest is too deep, too wild, he cannot survive here," she whispered to herself, tears soaking her cheeks. And then, with a heavy heart, she ran away from the village, leaving behind her child and her past. Now, this forest was no ordinary forest. It was thick, quiet, and far from the eyes of humans. It was a place where one would think nothing could survive. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. Not long after, a poor widow named Ngozi came to the forest. She was a small, humble woman who begged for a piece of land to farm, to make just enough food for herself. She carried a small basket on her head, searching for firewood and sustenance. And then she heard the faint, lonely cry of a baby. Her heart leapt, and she followed the sound. There, under the shade of an old tree, wrapped in a small blue blanket, was the child. Mama Ngozi did not hesitate. She scooped the baby into her arms, held him close, and whispered, "Don't worry, child. I will take care of you." And so the boy was raised by Mama Ngozi. Life was hard, the land barely yielded crops. Sometimes, they went to sleep hungry. He went to school for a short while, but without money, he was sent away again and again. Yet, the boy, named Emeka by Mama Ngozi, grew strong, kind, and handsome despite his rags. As he grew older, he began to notice the girls in the village. There was one girl he loved deeply, but she laughed at him, told him he was poor, that he could never reach her. He tried, over and over, but she would not even look at him. And her friend, cruel and cunning, often mocked him, saying he was only fit to be a servant. One day, that same friend went to Lagos to visit her uncle. She discovered that her uncle's boss, a wealthy billionaire, was looking for a houseboy to help around his estate. On her return to the village, she spoke to her friend, hinting at the opportunity. But when Emeka overheard, the girl laughed at him again, mocking him, insulting him, saying, "You are only good to carry water and wash clothes." Emeka returned home, his heart heavy, and told Mama Ngozi what had happened. She looked at him with tears in her eyes and said softly, "Emeka, sometimes, the world is cruel. But you must take this chance. Go, work, and survive. We have nothing here. If this is your way to eat, then do it." So, Emeka went. He told the girl he would take the job, and she laughed even louder, thinking he had no idea of what lay ahead. He traveled to Lagos, where he was taken in by the billionaire and his family. He worked hard, sweeping floors, cleaning cars, and doing every small task with diligence and humility. Now, the billionaire, a powerful man, had no male child. He longed for a son who could carry on his empire. And one day, the billionaire fell gravely ill. The doctors said he needed a blood transfusion quickly, but his blood type was rare. Desperation filled the household. They tried friends, family, even distant relatives, but none matched. In a trembling voice, Emeka suggested, "Madam, maybe you should check me." His hands shook. The billionaire's wife looked at him, surprised. Could this poor boy's blood save a billionaire? But there was no time. They rushed him to the hospital, and lo and behold, the blood matched. Emeka's blood saved the billionaire's life. The family was overwhelmed with gratitude. The billionaire asked about Emeka's parents. Emeka spoke of Mama Ngozi, of the hardships, of how she raised him. The billionaire, moved, invited her to Lagos. It was then that fate revealed its full design. The wife of the billionaire was shocked when she heard Mama Ngozi describe the small blue blanket. She asked, "Which forest exactly did you find him in? Was that day the day of the yam festival?" Mama Ngozi, slightly confused, answered, "Yes, that was the day." "How did you know?" The billionaire's wife's face went pale, her eyes filled with deep sorrow. She paused for a moment, and then, with a trembling voice, confessed, "That was the day I abandoned my own son in that very forest." Her voice faltered, and she continued, "I left him there, thinking he would never survive. I was scared and didn't know what to do. But now, to hear this, I see that fate had other plans." Mama Ngozi stood still, her mind racing. "You abandoned him?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. The billionaire's wife nodded, tears beginning to fill her eyes. I didn't think he would make it, and now to hear that he was raised by you. I can never undo what I did." Inside the mansion, the billionaire's wife, still reeling from the revelation of Emeka's identity, sat in a plush chair, trying to process the truth. She was speechless. The truth of the past had come back with a vengeance, and the weight of her action sat heavily on her heart. It was one thing to abandon a child in the forest, but to have him return and save the life of her husband, it was more than she could handle. As the billionaire's wife reflected on the past, she started to speak, her voice trembling. She turned to her husband, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her words cutting through the silence. "The time I told you I was pregnant. When I told you, you ran away. I was scared, confused, I didn't know what to do, and I thought I couldn't raise him alone. I gave birth to that child, and I threw him away." Her voice cracked as the guilt overtook her. "I ran to Lagos, hoping to forget what I had done. I didn't know I was throwing away the very thing that could have brought our family together." The billionaire's eyes softened, his face full of both sorrow and understanding. He had lived with the pain of not having a son to inherit his legacy. It had caused strain in his marriage, and he had always feared that his empire would fall into the wrong hands after his death. But now, sitting before him, was the very son he had never known he had, Emeka. "I never knew," the billionaire said, his voice full of emotion. "I never knew it would come to this. I had no idea that the son I sought for so long was out there, waiting for me. And now, look at him, standing before me." His hands trembled as he spoke. "Thank God for faith, thank God for your bravery, Emeka." Emeka, standing before them, could hardly believe it. The man who had abandoned him was now praising him, offering him the legacy of his wealth, his empire. Emeka had never asked for wealth. He had never sought to become the heir to a fortune. His heart was simple. He only wanted to make Mama Ngozi proud and show her that all the sacrifices she made for him had not been in vain. With a determined heart, Emeka spoke, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I don't want your wealth, sir," he said, looking directly at the billionaire. "But what I do want is to help the people who helped me, my mother, Mama Ngozi. I want to build a house for her in the village, a mansion, so she can live the rest of her life in peace, surrounded by the love and comfort she deserves. And I'll help others in the village who suffer the way she did." The billionaire, moved by Emeka's words, nodded with pride. "You have wisdom beyond your years, Emeka. You remind me so much of myself when I was young. Your mother, too, is a wise woman. And I will do everything in my power to help you fulfill your dreams." As they stood there, in the glow of wealth and family, Emeka made a promise to himself. He would use the billionaire's wealth to give back to those who had none, just as Mama Ngozi had given him life when he had none. Word spread fast through the village. News of Emeka's return, and his newfound fortune, traveled like wildfire. Everyone in the village was talking about the mysterious young man who had come to claim his legacy, the son of the billionaire, the one who had been abandoned in the forest all those years ago. One particular group, a group of young women who had once mocked Emeka for his poor appearance, found themselves in shock. These were the girls who had laughed at him, telling him he would never amount to anything, mocking his humble life. Among them was the girl Emeka had once loved, the girl who had scorned him and turned away. When they first heard about Emeka's wealth, they couldn't believe their ears. They thought it was some kind of joke. But when they saw his convoy of SUVs, with security guards and a sense of power that filled the air, their hearts sank. They ran to the village square to see the spectacle. They were convinced that the man in the convoy was the governor, but as they followed the cars, they were led to the construction site where Emeka was going to build the mansion for Mama Ngozi. The girls gathered around, gossiping in hushed tones, pointing fingers, and wondering who this young man was. They couldn't understand why the entire village was so enthralled by his presence. But when Emeka stepped out of the SUV, the air seemed to stop. His strong, confident stride, the tailored suit he wore, and the presence he exuded were nothing like the poor boy they had once mocked. They had all laughed at him, dismissed him as a nobody, and now, here he was, standing tall and powerful before them. Their eyes widened, their mouths fell open, and the shame they had once inflicted upon him washed over them like a wave. One of the girls, who had sent Emeka to Lagos to work as a houseboy, rushed up to him. "Emeka. Emeka, I knew you would make it," she stammered, her voice shaky. But Emeka simply looked at her, his face unreadable. You knew nothing about me, he said, his tone cold and firm. You judged me for who I was, without knowing where I came from. And now, you come to me, looking for something. You mocked me, and now, look at me. He took a deep breath, his voice full of disdain. You laughed at me, and now, you want to be part of my life. But I don't forget the past. The girl's face flushed with shame. She had never expected this encounter to go this way. She had imagined Emeka would be grateful for her attention, but now he was standing before her, a man with wealth and dignity, a man she had once dismissed as nothing more than a servant. As she stood there, speechless, Emeka turned away, walking towards the mansion he was building for his mother. The workers and engineers greeted him, but he paid them little attention. His focus was on his mother, Ngozi, who had stood by him when no one else did. The moment Emeka entered the village, it was clear to everyone that he had come to make a difference. His legacy, one of hope and resilience, would live on not only in the mansion he was building for his mother, but in the hearts of the villagers who had once abandoned him. The girl who had once mocked him now found herself regretful. She had been wrong to judge him, wrong to ignore the humanity within him. She had been blinded by pride and had underestimated the power of love and persistence. As the days went by, Emeka's story spread far and wide. He had gone from being a boy abandoned in the forest to becoming a man who would change the lives of everyone around him. And in doing so, he found his true family, a family built not on blood, but on the bonds of kindness, forgiveness, and the strength of the human spirit. But the journey was not over yet. There were still many battles to fight, many wrongs to right. Emeka knew that, and he was ready to face whatever challenges came his way. For he had already seen the power of faith and had learned that no matter how dark the past may be, there is always a future filled with light. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thrilling tales. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And stay tuned for the next chapter of our incredible story.